Hey, Walter Sorrells back with more tips for the knife maker. Today, the anatomy of the Japanese sword. People are often intimidated by Japanese swords. Why? Well, they're legitimately believed to be among the most sophisticated and beautiful weapons made in the pre-modern world. And there's a long and complex tradition of connoisseurship that comes along with the physical object. Oh yeah, and there's a ton of mythologization, misinformation, and out-and-out BS out there floating around about Japanese swords. The Japanese sword can be viewed as an art object, or as a symbol of Japanese cultural traditions, or as a sort of totem of the warrior ethos. And that's all fine, but every aspect of its design evolved for extremely practical utilitarian reasons, just like a screwdriver or a can opener or a Glock. My opinion, any true appreciation of the Japanese sword has to start with the practical, how it works. This video is not intended for specialists, this is for laymen. We're going to focus on simple stuff here. We're going to show the major parts of the sword and its furniture, and we'll talk some basic terminology, and we'll give some brief explanations of why the Japanese sword is designed the way it is. We'll also show you how to take it apart and put it back together. Now, normally, Japanese sword connoisseurs start by talking about the blade, and then the mountings are seen as an afterthought. I'm going in the opposite direction. I'm going to start at the outside and sort of peel back the onion, and we'll reach the blade at the end. There's a reason for this. My feeling is that the mountings of the sword really help us understand how the sword's used and how it developed over time. All right, let's start with this, the button. The button, the zipper, the snap, these are modern inventions. Virtually every form of clothing worn by humans before, around 1400, was held together by folding, tucking, and wrapping. A clasp here, a pin there, but that's about it. Traditional Japanese clothing's no different. The only thing that stood between you and a bunch of embarrassing nakedness was a cloth belt known as an obi, which kept all the robes and undergarments together and kept them from flapping open. So, what does any of that have to do with the world's most badass sword? Stick with me and we'll get there. The katana evolved from the older tachi, a sword which hung on a sort of sling from your belt. The samurai were originally horsed archers, so the tachi was made to be employed and deployed on horseback. But over time, the samurai took on more of an infantry role, and believe me, trying to run with a tachi banging and slamming against your leg would have been a massive pain in the ass. So the katana's shape is more or less the same as the tachi's, but its mounting system is totally different. It's stuck through the belt, or obi, where it rides much more conveniently while you run around on the battlefield, or, for that matter, while you amble around town. The scabbard, known as a saya, is made from wood with a lacquer coating which protects the wood and the blade from water. This stubby little eyelet is called a kuragata. A long cord known as a sageo fits through the eyelet and is wrapped around the belt to keep it from slipping out of the obi. Again, simple, practical purpose. Traditionally, the saya has a mouth made from water buffalo horn. This is known as the koiguchi. Some also have a matching fitting at the bottom known as a kojiri. This is largely ornamental but also increases the durability of the saya and can even aid in using it as a striking weapon, a technique taught in some Japanese fighting systems. Alright, before we move on to the handle, let's talk about one of the most interesting aspects of the Japanese sword: All of the mountings or furniture, which are generically referred to as Kosher Eye or Kosher Eye, are removable. This reflected the value and durability of the blade itself, which might be handed down generation after generation, long past the time when the vegetable and animal materials used to make the handle and scabbard would have rotted away. Okay, now let's talk about the handle. The handle, known as a tsuka, sometimes pronounced ska, consists of a wooden core wrapped with untanned manta ray skin, which is in turn wrapped with silk braid, or in some cases leather or other oddball materials such as baleen from whale mouths. The principle here is the same as modern composites like carbon fiber. You're uniting the rigidity and compressive strength of wood to the amazing tensile strength and toughness of manta ray skin. At the ends of the tsuka are two fittings, generally made from copper or copper alloys, known as the fuchi, the collar on the blade end, and the butt cap, known as a kashira or kashira. Traditionally, these were made as a pair. They serve to strengthen the handle, both protecting it from impact, helping secure the blade rigidly to the handle, and keeping the handle from tearing apart under the extreme forces generated during cutting. There are also two decorative fittings which fit under the handle braids. They're known as manuki, and they have the signal quality of being the only parts in the Japanese sword that have zero utility. The whole handle unit is held onto the tang of the blade with a tiny tapered peg known as a mikugi, which fits through a hole known as a mikugi ana. Traditionally, this peg was made from bamboo. There are small brass tools made specifically for removing them, but if you just use a small punch or screwdriver, the heavens will not open up and destroy you. That said, using a brass punch is way preferable with antique swords, because if you slip, you won't mar an 800-year-old treasure. Pop the mikugi out, and the whole tsuka slides off the tang of the blade. When taking the blade apart, if everything's nice and tight, the tsuka is fairly hard to remove. So hold it in your left hand, give your wrist a hard smack with your right fist, and the whole thing will generally come free. Then we just pull it all apart. Between the tsuka and the blade is the guard or tsuba. Like all the fittings of the sword, these were made by specialist craftsmen, and in some cases enormous energy and artistry was put into their manufacture. At the end of the day, though, we can't forget their basic purpose, which was simply to keep the swordsman's hand from getting chopped to bits in combat. Now, the tsuba nests between two washers known as seppa. An important thing to understand about the handle system of a Japanese sword is that it's subject to wear. As that wear progresses, the tsuba gets loose and rattly. This is not only annoying, but at a certain point it becomes hazardous. So seppa are not only washers which keep the tsuba from getting scratched or dented by the corners of the sword, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, but they're also shims, which allow you to adjust the tightness of the fit between the tsuka and the blade. So seppa can be taken off the blade and replaced with thicker ones, or additional thinner seppa can be added. So, let's remove the tsuka. What's left is the blade itself and this small fitting, usually made from copper or copper alloys, known as a hibachi. The hibachi acts as a sort of shock absorber and bushing, distributing the extreme forces to which the blade is subjected so they aren't concentrated in only one or two points of contact between the blade and the guard. Without the hibachi, the guard or the seppa would quickly develop dents, which could lead to looseness and possibly even failure of the handle. The overall engineering of the Japanese blade evolved in such a manner that nearly every part of the system has several ingeniously interlocking purposes, and the hibachi is no different. Not only does it connect the blade to the handle, but it also serves as a sleeve, which inserts into a perfectly mating orifice in the scabbard. When properly adjusted, this seals the atmosphere of the scabbard so that moisture doesn't get onto the blade, and also keeps the sword from accidentally flying out of the scabbard. Like everything else, the hibachi is subject to wear. When it gets too worn, pop it off, make a new one, and you're back in the fight. So, now the preliminaries are over and we get to the heart of the matter, the blade itself. This blade is a katana. You'll hear some people stress the syllables in a more Japanese way as katana. All Japanese blades consist of a tang or nakago, which is roughly finished with a file, and the blade itself, which is meticulously polished. The dividing line between the two is defined by these two little shelves known as machi, which mate with the hibachi. So, what makes a katana a katana? Basically, length. Katana are traditionally designated as any sword over 2 shaku of blade length. Now, in case your command of archaic Japanese units of measure is a little shaky, a shaku equates to about 12 inches or 30 centimeters. So, swords over 2 shaku, katanas. Between 1 and 2 shaku, 12 to 24 inches or 30 to 60 centimeters, those swords are known as wakizashis, and anything under that, that is below about 12 inches or 30 centimeters, is called a tanto. Before we talk about the business end of the blade, let's discuss the tang. The tang of a Japanese sword is never polished or cleaned in any way. Over the centuries, the nakago develops a patina which changes over time and is an important part of the evaluation process of older blades. If you have a genuine Japanese blade, never ever clean this part of the blade. An additional part of the tang is the mei or signature, which was chiseled into the tang by the maker. Mei could be quite extensive and cover both sides of the blade, or quite simple depending on the smith. Sometimes the signature is only a character or two, indicating the name of the smith or the school he was part of. In other cases, the mei includes dates, testing information, the name of the customer for whom the blade was made, the particular event it was made for, and so on. Okay, now to the fun part. The characteristic aspect of the Japanese sword is its curvature. This is referred to as sori. The samurai, as we mentioned, were originally cavalrymen, so the sword they carried, known as a tachi, was intended as a single-bladed slicing weapon that could be used from a horse. Over time, the tachi evolved into the katana, tracking its evolution from a military cavalry weapon to an infantry and personal defense weapon. Alright, one of the first things you'll notice is this wiggly line running down the blade. That's a visual marker which shows where the hardened portion of the blade divides from the unhardened portion. There's a lot of confusion about this. Japanese swords traditionally have two separate types of forge welding operations, one of which involves welding a softer steel core to a harder steel cutting edge. This has nothing whatsoever to do with the hamon. The hamon is created by heat treating, not as a result of any forging operations. The smith puts a clay material on the spine, then the blade is heated to about 1500 Fahrenheit, then the blade is quenched in water. The clay retards cooling of the spine, preventing it from hardening. These different microscopic structures refract light differently when carefully polished, and that results in something you can perceive with the naked eye. The result? The hamon. In modern metallurgical terms, the edge is formed of a harder martensitic structure, whereas the spine is formed of pearlite and ferrite. This blade, typical of katanas, has a geometry known as shinogi zukuri, meaning that it has a defined and counter-polished point and this ridge and secondary bevel running down the side of the blade. This would have increased the blade's strength to weight ratio, making it stronger when cutting armored targets. Other Japanese swords, and particularly shorter blades, are often seen with no bevel, like, say, a chef's knife. This style was known as hirazukuri, but hirazukuri katanas can be found too. As we mentioned, the typical Japanese blade has a single cutting edge. This is known as the ha. The spine is known as the mune. The tip here is known as the kisaki. This ridge is known as the shinogi, and the smaller bevel at the top of the blade is known as the shinogi-ji. Japanese swords were made from steel, which was repeatedly folded and then forge welded back into a solid block. This was done for practical reasons because the steel, as it came out of the smelter, was full of voids, impurities, and general crud. Forge welding also homogenized the carbon content, making the blade metallurgically consistent from one end to the other. The side result of this process was that a sort of wood grain effect was created in the steel. This effect is known as hada. Connoisseurs obsess over the aesthetic qualities of the hada, but it should never be forgotten that at the end of the day, hada is a side result of the various processes smiths used in trying to make an effective cutting tool out of very primitive material. So, that's about it. Now our sword has been reduced to a bunch of parts on a table. Let's put it back together. Hibachi onto the blade, then seppas and the tsuba. Make sure that you get them in order because they should be tightly fitted to the nakago, and if carefully fitted, will only fit in a certain order. Then the tsuka. Often you may have to whack it on something to drive it all firmly together. Make sure that whatever you whack it on is soft and won't mar the fittings. Then insert the pin, give it a little tap with a hammer to seat it. Again, a brass hammer is less likely to damage the metalwork. When sliding a blade in and out of the scabbard, you should hold the scabbard spine down, so the blade rests on the mune or spine so as not to scratch up the blade. Then gently slide it in. Saya into the belt, wrap the sageo around it, and boom, you're ready to go. So what's my overall message here? The Japanese sword is a wonderfully efficient and effective piece of design. It works in a very logical and simple way, and there's no reason for anybody to be scared off by all the hype, the mythology, or the irritating trolls on the internet. In my view, the Japanese sword speaks for itself. The more you learn about its history and traditions and manufacture, the richer your understanding, but still, the object speaks for itself. Anybody can look at a Japanese sword and find something to appreciate. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel and check out my website, waltersorrellsblades.com, where you can find more of my work. You'll also find plenty more videos there that you can't find on YouTube with very, very detailed information about all aspects of Japanese blade making. Also, like me on Facebook at Walter Sorrells Blades.